Dry eye disease, DED for short, affects millions of people around the world in varying degrees, from those being asymptomatic to those experiencing extreme discomfort. In this video, I will walk you through an introduction to dry eye disease. I'll explain a few frequently asked questions on the topic, including what is dry eye disease, who gets dry eye disease, what are the causes and risk factors of dry eye disease, what are the symptoms to watch for, and ultimately, why should we even care to have a conversation about it? Stay, baby, don't go. Hi everybody, this is Dr. Natalie Chai. This channel brings you the latest science-based education and treatment in dry eye, myopia management, and specialty contact lenses to help you understand why it should matter to you for optimal eye health, function, comfort, and even beauty. So dry eye disease is one of the most frequent causes of patient visits to eye care practitioners, and the way it manifests itself to how it makes a person feel differs from person to person. Now, I like to describe it as the disease with many faces. Now, our understanding of the condition has drastically evolved over the last few decades, with huge thanks to the collaborative work of world leaders in research and clinical practice. Let me know if this has happened to you. We would share with our eye doctor that our eyes are dry, and the diagnosis we would typically get is something along the lines of, yes, I agree, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, your eyes are dry. Then we would follow up with giving you maybe a sample of an eye drop. They're really tiny bottles, and maybe to use 2 times per day. And if it doesn't work, to just go to the pharmacy and pick up something different. Sound familiar? You may try it for maybe a day if we're lucky, then forget about them, and on we go with our lives. Let me tell you, we have failed you as protectors of your ocular health. Now, the good news is optometrists and ophthalmologists worldwide have come to that awareness, and in some ways we're atoning for our shortcomings. A lot of what we know about dry eye disease can be attributed to the work and reports from the Tear Film and Ocular Surface Society, otherwise known as TFOS. They are a non-profit organization dedicated to, quote, modernizing the eye care community's concepts and clinical practices surrounding this widespread yet poorly understood condition, unquote. They currently have 4 groundbreaking reports on dry eye disease. The first one is called the TFOS International Dry Eye Workshop, otherwise known as DEWS, from 2007. The second one is called the TFOS International Workshop on Meibomian Gland Dysfunction, otherwise known as MGD, from 2010. The third one is called the TFOS International Workshop on Contact Lens Discomfort from 2013. And the most recent one is called the TFOS Dry Eye Workshop 2, or TFOS DEWS 2, from 2017. Prior to 2007, there was only one publication from the National Eye Institute Industry Workshop on Clinical Trials in Dry Eye in 1995. So the community has seen an exponential rise in dry eye citations since then, as we continue to learn more and more in diagnosis and treatment. So the TFOS DEWS 2 report is the most comprehensive literature known today. It took 2 years, comprising of 12 subcommittees made up of 150 experts from 23 countries around the world. So it is a 140 plus page report. So this is as legitimate as you can get when it comes to scientific literature. So that's the cool thing about this report. It's standardized every aspect of medicine and dry eye disease from the beginning all the way to the end. So the only way the report was even able to be published was only if all 150 members agreed on every printed word in that report. So now the way we diagnose and treat dry eye is now the same from C to C. Essentially sifted through and compiled the most relevant information from these reports to teach you everything dry eye, from this introduction video to all the videos to come. So let's get started. So number 1, what is dry eye disease? We've seen the definition revised numerous times, reflecting the advancement in research. So the first definition of dry eye, as you probably remember, was actually published in 1995. Quote, dry eye is a disorder of the tear film due to tear deficiency or excessive tear evaporation, which causes damage to the interpalpebral ocular surface and is associated with symptoms of ocular discomfort, unquote. So even though it was in its baby years, it really set the stage for what we even have today. So about 10 years later, TFOS News Report in 2007 released an updated definition. Quote, dry eye is a multifactorial disease of the tears and ocular surface that results in symptoms of discomfort, visual disturbance, and tear film instability with potential damage to the ocular surface. It is accompanied by increased osmolarity of the tear film and inflammation of the ocular surface. Unquote. Now, this was the first to acknowledge not only that dry eye was indeed a disease entity, but that it had a multifactorial etiology. So this definition centered on the clinical effects and associated signs of dry eye. So now let's fast forward about 10 years later with the TFOS News Report in 2017, and they released their definition, and it is just as long, if not longer. So, quote, dry eye is a multifactorial disease of the ocular surface characterized by a loss of homeostasis of the tear film and accompanied by ocular symptoms in which tear film instability and hyperosmolarity, ocular surface inflammation and damage, and neurosensory abnormalities play etiological roles, unquote. There are a few noteworthy differences from the original Dews definition that I'd like to point out. So the first thing I'd like to point out is underneath, dry eye is a multifactorial disease. So rarely can we pinpoint one cause, and as with many conditions in medicine, there's always a gray zone with many factors interacting with each other. Now, the word disease provides implication that there is a pathological process involved affecting quality of life. Now, the second thing I'd like to touch upon is underneath, loss of homeostasis of the tear film. So simply put, there's an interruption of balance or state of equilibrium. So you need an equal balance to maintain the stability of your tear film. Now, without that stability, problems will start to arise. Now, the third thing is called ocular symptoms. So this includes discomfort or visual disturbances or both. Now, this remains a central feature of the disease. Now, the fourth thing is tear film instability and hyperosmolarity. There is an increase in solute. There is an increase in concentration. Now, the fifth thing is underneath ocular surface inflammation and damage. Now, in the general sense, it is your body's process of fighting against things that harm it. This can either be acute or chronic. In the context of dry eye, this is more of a chronic nature where the response lingers. So it leaves your eyes in a constant state of alert. Now, over time, this chronic inflammation may have a negative impact on your corneal tissue, causing damage. And lastly, there's something called neurosensory abnormalities. What this means, it changes the way we perceive ocular pain, discomfort, irritation, or lack thereof when compared to an otherwise healthy eye. I wish I could just stop here and move on. However, classifying the type of dry eye is equally as important. Now, the purpose of classifying dry eye is to guide diagnosis and to improve patient care through appropriate treatment. So it's really very important for us as clinicians. Here are some examples of the 3 different schemes here. I will only talk about the most recent one. So here are the critical points about it. The scheme demonstrates the potential for overlap between the 2 primary categories, which are aqueous deficient and evaporative, rather than being mutually exclusive from each other. In other words, one can have a combination of both existing on a continuum rather than having one or the other. Second, the scheme includes triaging elements to help with better diagnosis, which ultimately helps with choosing the appropriate treatment protocol. Number 3, the scheme acknowledges the wide range of possible subcategories that could cause dry eye disease and other ocular surface disease. These are conditions that closely mimic or masquerade as dry eye disease, and many that can occur concurrently or at the same time with dry eye disease. We call that secondary dry eye. And lastly, the scheme also considers atypical cases where patients exhibit symptoms of dry eye, but there are no signs that we see. This is what we call neuropathic pain or preclinical dry eye state. Now, the opposite is true too, where there are patients who are asymptomatic, however, present with obvious signs. This is what we would call reduced corneal sensitivity. Number 2, who gets dry eye? Now, epidemiology is a challenging task as we can't paint a single brush as it varies between population, geography, age, and sex. Now, much of the reports are focused in Asia and Europe, and now none has been reported south of the equator, so it's a little bit skewed. However, it's what we have and that's what we will work off of. Now, there are also very few studies in younger populations, so those that are actually less than 40 years old. Now, here's the summary. Now, the prevalence of dry eye disease with and without symptoms range from 5% to 50%. So it really depends where you are in the world. The prevalence based on signs alone was generally higher and more variable, reaching up to 75% in some populations. Prevalence appears to be higher in Asians than in Caucasian populations, and prevalence appears to increase linearly with age. The increase in prevalence by decade is greater with the clinical signs compared to the symptoms, though. Higher rates of dry eye disease are reported in women than men, although the difference generally becomes more significant with increasing age. So it's actually pretty equal earlier in life, relative to high prevalence rates reported in younger subjects and also in school children. And this can be attributed to just an increased amount of digital device use. Number 3, what are the causes and risk factors of dry eye disease? Now, risk factors in healthcare are important to address to improve global health and to reduce global healthcare costs. Now, this helps us further define what we have control over and what we don't. Now, risk factors for dry eye disease were categorized in the TFOS-DUCE-2 study in 2017 as either consistent, probable, or inconclusive. So let's just take a look at the consistent risk factors. It's a long list again. Now, underneath the category of probable risk factors, in the inconclusive category, so I don't know about you, but when I read through these risk factors, I thought to myself that we're all practically doomed. Number 4, what are the symptoms of dry eye disease? So when I used to ask my patients, do your eyes feel dry? I already know the answer, and it's usually is nope, but ... So I found out quickly that I was actually asking the wrong question. If you haven't already guessed, dry eye is chronic and slow progressing. So this means that the physiological changes happening in our eyes happen so slowly that our body adapts to the changes to the point that we don't notice a difference until way later in life. So then, rather than asking questions around how your eyes feel, we have to tweak that question to reflect possible interruption in the functionality and productivity in a person's everyday life. To me, we can't just use a term to ask about a certain symptoms. Let me draw a parallel to this is if your doctor was trying to find out if you have diabetes, for example. You can't just ask the patient, do you have diabetes? Rather, your doctor would probably ask you questions around, do you find yourself more thirsty? Do you go to the bathroom often? Do you feel more tired? So you see, those are the symptoms that we're asking to get to the diagnosis. So let me share what the most common symptoms are. My ultimate goal when I'm treating my patients with dry eye disease is to have them think of their eyes less throughout the day. Number 5, why should I even care to have a conversation about dry eye? In a paper published in the BMJ, the authors proposed dry eye disease to be autonomous, self-sustaining, and that it is progressively disconnected from its initial causes. This is what they call the vicious circle scheme. So what this means is once you enter that cycle, the longer a patient is in that circle without intervention, it just becomes harder and harder for us to break out of it, even if we take away that initial cause or even reduce it. Now, on a more personal level, when someone progresses to moderate to severe dry eye, it can cause significant limitations to their daily activities, Sometimes it can reduce their social life. Once you have dry eye disease, there is no true 100% cure. However, we can effectively treat and manage. So my final thoughts with this video is that statistically, optometrists, ophthalmologists, your doctor, and other health professionals, we see dry eye patients every single day. There's a lot that we can do for you, even in the early stages, and there's a lot of risk factors that are controllable. So it is a team effort between patient and doctor, where for us as optometrists, we must have the courage to learn more about dry eye, and with that knowledge, start the conversation with our patients about dry eye, especially when we start noticing the signs. So that's it here for me. Thank you for sticking around, and hopefully you learned something new here today. If this is your first time on the channel, please hit the subscribe button, especially if you found value to it, and make sure to also click on the notification bell here. As soon as I post a video, you'll know about it. Otherwise, I hope to see you in the next video.